The sun didn't shine in bitter dust. It punished. It was a ball of molten brass, suspended above a valley of red rock and dried sagebrush. Silas Thorne tugged at the brim of his hat, feeling the sweat burn on the scar that crossed his left cheek, a map of a life he had tried to forget, but which the West insisted on reminding him of. The metallic sound of his spurs against the dry wood of the porch was the only rhythm in a town that seemed to hold its breath. Silas pushed open the swinging doors of the Last Chance Saloon. The air inside was a thick mixture of cheap tobacco smoke, rye whiskey, and the metallic smell of fear. He didn't need to look to know that all eyes were on him. A man who carries a holster as low and worn as this isn't just a traveler. He's an omen, a glass of the least bad, said Silas, his voice sounding like crushed gravel. The bartender, a man whose face resembled a piece of tan leather, poured the murky liquid without a word. His hands trembled. Silas noticed. He's still here, isn't he? Silas asked, before even touching the drink. In the sheriff's office, the bartender whispered. But the sheriff's been buried behind the church for 3 days. El Buitre and his gang have turned this town into a slaughterhouse, Thorne. You shouldn't have come back. Silas downed the whiskey in one gulp. It burned like a sin. I didn't come back for the town. I came back for Promise. The Promise was named Elena, the late sheriff's daughter, and the only person who still saw Silas as anything more than a hired killer. El Buitre kept her locked up, a trophy to ensure the miners of Bitter Dust continued digging for the silver he now claimed. Silas walked out onto the main street. The wind howled through the cracks in the wooden buildings, carrying the sound of a melancholy harmonica coming from somewhere in the shadows. At the end of the street, 3 men emerged from the sheriff's office. In the center, wearing a coyote fur coat and sporting a grin full of gold teeth, was El Buitre. Silas Thorne, shouted the bandit, opening his arms. I heard you become a man of God up north. Did you come to pray for our success? I came to give you a choice, Buitre, replied Silas, stopping exactly 15 meters away. Release the girl, take your dogs, and get out before the sun sets. Or this will be the last sunset you see, and I guarantee it won't be pretty. Biter's men laughed. Their hands hovered over the butts of their revolvers. Time seemed to stretch, each second weighing like a ton of lead. The West doesn't forgive hesitation. When Biter's first henchman moved his shoulder, Silas was already in motion. The dry crack of his Colt .45 echoed to the mountains, followed by 2 more rhythmic shots. Bang, bang, bang. The first man fell before he could draw. The second was hit in the chest, tumbling over a barrel of water. Buitre, faster than he looked, dove behind a hay wagon, firing frantically. Silas felt a bullet tear through his shirt sleeve, the heat of the lead passing millimeters from his skin. He rolled behind a support pillar of the general store. Splinters would flew from the impact of Biter's shots. You're old, Thorne. Buitre shouted, reloading. The world has changed. There's no place for tired heroes here. Thank goodness I was never a hero, Silas murmured to himself. He took a deep breath, counting the shots. Buitre was reckless. On the bandit's 5th shot, Silas left the cover. He didn't run. He walked with the calm of someone who has already accepted his own end. Buitre aimed, but his gun misfired. The click of an empty cylinder. The expression of terror on the bandit's face was the last thing the sun illuminated before Silas pulled the trigger one last time. When the dust settled, silence returned to Bitter Dust, but this time it was a silence of relief, not fear. Elena emerged from the office, her eyes red, but her posture firm. She looked at Silas, and for a moment, the hardened gunslinger seemed just a tired man. Are you going to stay? She asked, as the sky tinged purple and orange. Silas looked at the horizon, where the trail disappeared into the black mountains. He adjusted his hat and mounted his bay horse. Some debts are never fully paid. Elena, and my trail is still too long to be left in one place. He rode off without looking back, leaving only the rhythmic sound of hooves and the legend of a man who was a shadow for the wicked and a last ray of sunshine for the desperate. Silas Thorne's trail wasn't made only of dust. It was made of memories that weighed more than the iron on his belt. 3 days had passed since he left Bitter Dust. The suffocating heat of the valley had given way to the sharp, rarefied air of the White Bone Mountains. The silence was not. It was a relief. It was a warning. The sun was setting, tinging the snow on the peaks of red that reminded Silas of L-Biter's blood on the saloon floor. He stopped his horse, a sturdy bay named Ranker, when he smelled cedar smoke. It wasn't forest fire. It was a controlled campfire. Silas dismounted, keeping his right hand relaxed, but inches from the butt of his coat. He rounded a massive rock and found a makeshift camp. Sitting by the fire wasn't a band of renegades, but a boy who couldn't have been 16 yet, holding a Winchester rifle that seemed too big for his hands. "You're slow to pick up a scent, Thorn," the boy said, without taking his eyes off the flames. Silas didn't relax. "And you're too young to be so close to death, boy. Who sent you?" The young man looked up. His eyes were a pale blue, as icy as the mountain air. "Nobody sent me. I came to claim what is rightfully mine. My name is Julian Vane." The name hit Silas like a mule's kick. Vane, the surname of his former partner, the man he had been forced to abandon in a botched robbery 10 years ago. "Your father was a good man, Julian," Silas said, his voice losing some of its harshness. "But he made choices that led him down the wrong path. I tried to pull him out." "You left him to the wolves," Julian spat, finally raising his rifle. The barrel trembled slightly, but the intent was firm. "I heard you saved that little town in the valley. The great Silas Thorn, the hired gun. But I know the truth. You're just a coward who survived while the best died." Silas stepped forward. The snap of a branch under his boot sounded like a gunshot in the mountain silence. "If you pull that trigger, kid, make sure you don't miss. Because I'm not going to shoot back, and you'll have to carry the weight of killing an unarmed man for the rest of your life." He opened his coat, revealing that he wasn't drawing. "What do you want, Julian? Revenge or the truth?" Silas asked, stopping a few feet from the gun barrel. Julian hesitated. The hatred in his eyes fought against exhaustion and uncertainty. He lowered the rifle, his hands finally succumbing to the cold. "I didn't come just for you. The man who arrested my father, the man who tortured him before hanging him, he's no longer a lawman." Silas narrowed his eyes. He knew who the boy was talking about. Colonel Sterling, a former Union officer who now ruled the mining town of Ocaso with an iron fist and an army of mercenaries. Sterling turned Ocaso into a living hell. Julian continued. "He has my father's pardon letters, documents proving he was betrayed by his own army before becoming an outlaw. I want to clear his name, and I want Sterling's head on a platter." Silas looked at his own hands, calloused and marked by time. He just wanted to ride off into the sunset and disappear, but fate seemed to have a cruel sense of humor. "Sterling has 30 men under his command, Julian, and mountain cannons. You wouldn't last 10 minutes alone." "Then teach me," said the boy, with a determination Silas recognized from mirrors 20 years ago. "Teach me to be like you." Silas Thorn sighed, picking up a branch and poking the fire. The fire crackled, throwing sparks into the dark sky. "I'm not going to teach you to be like me, kid. I'm going to teach you how to survive. And if we're lucky, neither of us will see the bottom of a grave in sunset." They stood there, the old gunslinger and the ghost son, united by a past of blood and a future of smoke. The journey to sunset was just beginning. Silas wasn't a man of many words, and Julian soon learned that, in the wake of a gunslinger, silence was the best school. They spent 2 weeks in the bowels of the Whitebone Mountains, where the air was so cold it felt like it cut through your lungs. The training didn't begin with gunfire, but with patience. Silas forced Julian to load the revolver and rifle blindfolded, repeating the motion until his hands bled and the metal felt like part of his own skin. "The gun barrel isn't a scepter, kid," Silas said, watching Julian shiver in the cold. "It's a tool of interruption. You don't shoot to kill. You shoot to stop someone else's time before they stop yours." On a gray afternoon, Silas placed 5 empty bottles on a fallen log 30 meters away. Sterling doesn't use stationary targets. He uses men who move, who shout, and who shoot back. "Hit all 5 before I count to 10, or we'll spend the night without a campfire." Julian missed the first time. The second time, he hit 3. The third time, under Silas's icy gaze, he didn't aim with his eyes. He aimed with his instinct. Bang! Bang, bang! Bang, bang! The bottles exploded. They descended in a rain of green glass. Silas simply nodded. There were no compliments. In the West, the reward for being good was to stay alive for another day. They descended the mountain in the dead of a moonless night. Sunset loomed on the horizon like an open wound in the valley. Unlike Bitter Dust, Sunset was an industrial city, fueled by coal and Sterling's greed. Chimneys spewed black smoke that obscured the stars, and the constant sound of hydraulic hammers echoed like a sick mechanical heart. "How do we get in?" Julian whispered, adjusting the rifle on his back. "Through the back." Sterling turned the old silver mine into his base of operations. He feels safe in there, surrounded by iron and stone. That's where he makes a mistake all tyrants make. He thinks the walls protect him, but they only trap him. They left the horses in a grove of dry oaks and continued on foot. The smell of sulfur and burnt oil was almost unbearable. Silas carried his hunting knife in his left hand and his Colt in its holster, ready for the loot. The infiltration was a game of shadows. Silas moved with the fluidity of an ancient predator, avoiding the patrols of mercenaries in gray uniforms, a pale and macabre imitation of Sterling's old army. They climbed the wooden scaffolding that led to the upper offices of the mine. Down there, in the central courtyard, Silas saw Sterling's cruelty firsthand. Men in chains, working under the whip of foremen, extracting the ore that financed the colonel's madness. There, Silas pointed to an iron balcony guarded by 2 sentries armed with repeating rifles. "That's his office. Your father's documents are in that safe. And Sterling," Julian's voice was like a wire of steel, "he'll be waiting. Men like him always expect the past to come knocking. They just don't expect it to come armed." Silas and Julian took down the guards with the precision of silent executioners before they could even raise the alarm. They kicked open the double mahogany doors, entering a luxurious office that smelled of cognac and arrogance. Behind an immense desk, seated in a buffalo leather chair, was Colonel Sterling. He was a man with perfectly trimmed white hair and eyes that seemed made of marble. He didn't move. In his hand, he swung a crystal glass. "Silas Thorne, I should have known the smell of carrion would bring the vulture back," said Sterling, his voice calm and authoritative. "And you must be Vane's offspring. You have the same desperate eyes as your father before the rope stretched." Julian stepped forward, his finger itching on the trigger of his rifle. "Hand over the documents, Sterling, and perhaps I'll let you have a fair trial." Sterling let out a dry laugh, which sounded like bones rattling together. "Justice? In this territory, I am the law, the judge, and the gravedigger. You enter my castle, but you forgot one thing." Sterling pressed a hidden button under the table. A shrill alarm began to sound throughout the mine, and the sound of dozens of boots running on the metal outside indicated that the time for stealth was over. "Now," Sterling grinned, pulling a small double-barreled pistol from his sleeve, "let's see if your training was sufficient, boy." Sterling's alarm wasn't just a bell. It was a war cry that echoed to the iron galleries of the mine. As the sound of heavy boots rose up the stairs, Sterling tossed a yellowed piece of paper onto the mahogany table. "Look closely, boy," hissed the colonel, a cruel smile dancing on his thin lips. "Look at the signature at the end of the confession that led your father to the gallows." Julian picked up the paper with a trembling hand. His eyes scanned the quick lines, stopping at the name written in faded but unmistakable ink. Silas Thorne. The silence in the office became heavier than lead. Julian turned to Silas, the Winchester rifle now pointed at the chest of the man who, in recent weeks, had been his mentor. "Is it true?" Julian's voice was a broken whisper. "You turned him in?" Silas didn't look away. His eyes, once icy, now carried an oceanic sadness. "The plan went wrong, Julian. We were surrounded. Sterling gave me a choice. Your father's head or your mother's life, and yours, you who were still a baby in the crib. I chose you. I carried his sin so that you could have a future. You lied to me," Julian shouted, his finger tightening on the trigger. "I lied so you wouldn't grow up hating the man who saved you," Silas replied, stepping forward, ignoring the gun pointed at him. But Sterling didn't tell the end of the story. He promised forgiveness to your father and, instead, hanged him at dawn. Sterling let out a loud laugh. "And I'd do it again. In the chess game of this desert, pawns are made to be sacrificed. And now, both of you will die on my board." The colonel fired his small sleeve pistol. The bullet struck Silas in the shoulder, throwing him backward. At the same instant, the office door exploded as Sterling's mercenaries stormed into the room. Chaos ensued. Julian, driven by a mixture of fury and instinct, didn't shoot Silas. He turned and fired at the first guards who entered. Silas, even wounded, drew his Colt with lightning speed, taking down 2 mercenaries before their bodies hit the ground. "Julian, the dynamite!" roared Silas, pointing to the supply crates in the corner of the room, intended for the mine's expansion. Julian understood. He grabbed a kerosene lamp from the table and threw it at the gunpowder and fuse crates. "Get out of here! Now!" Silas grabbed Julian's arm, and they both leaped across the iron balcony, landing on a coal wagon several feet below, just as Sterling's office exploded in an orange fireball. The mine structure began to groan. Centuries old, support beams cracked under the pressure. The ground of Ocaso trembled as the underground galleries began to collapse, swallowing Sterling's mercenaries and greed into the depths of the earth. They rode until the glow of the Ocaso fire was just an orange scar on the dark horizon. They stopped at the top of a hill where the wind blew clean, far from the smell of sulfur. Silas dismounted with difficulty, pressing his hand against his bloodied shoulder. He handed Julian a small leather pouch he had managed to retrieve from Sterling's safe before the explosion. It contained the deeds of the Vane family lands and the official pardon, cleansed of treachery. "Your father's name is Clean Boy," Silas said, his breath short. "And mine, well, mine never was." Julian looked at the old gunslinger. The hatred was still there, but it had been tempered by a painful understanding. In the West, there are no pure heroes, only men trying to survive impossible choices. "Where are you going?" Julian asked. Silas looked south, where the Mexican border disappeared into the morning mist. "Where the ghosts won't follow me, or where I can finally face them." Julian tucked the papers into his coat and mounted his horse. He didn't thank him, and Silas hadn't expected it. "If I see you again, Silas, I don't know if I'll be the boy you trained or the man who came to collect the debt." Silas offered a pale smile, the first in many years. "I hope you're the man, Julian. The world needs more men and fewer legends." Julian spurred his horse and rode off toward the rising sun, back to the lands that were now rightfully his. Silas Thorne stood there for a long time, watching the boy's silhouette disappear. Then he adjusted his hat, mounted his bay horse, and rode in the opposite direction, becoming once again just a lonely shadow in the untamed vastness of the Old West.